Hello, welcome again to the Retro
Shed.
Shed. We have not been on any outings actually this weekend,
we
we're doing a show about. Well, before we actually tell you what we're doing a show about today,
we have some really exciting news to tell you about today.
We do indeed actually
I'm
now.
excited.
So, some of us of a certain age, not your age,
Not my age.
not your age, will remember a programme on Channel 4 back in the day called Games Master. Now, I bet you don't know anything about Games Master, do you?
Well, unbelievably, this show ran from 1992 to 1998.
It did.
And it was the first ever TV show in the UK dedicated to computer and video games.
It did.
It featured presenters such as Dominic Diamond,
Diamond.
Dave Perry, Julian Riggler, and a host of guest appearances every week.
That's right.
It is so funny, isn't
You
it?
looked that up, didn't you?
No, how he gives you something and says, you won't have a clue about that, and I just give you those facts.
Now, excitingly, in conjunction with Craig Turner and the guys over at Revival Retro, and Dave Perry himself actually, we, the Retro Shed, are actually involved in an exciting new production that's going to be on YouTube called Games Animal TV.
Now, the idea behind this project was sown from the interest in the Revival 2017. It took place this year at Bescott Stadium in Walsall.
And the one that you didn't want to come to, actually.
I felt sick that day.
Did you? You should have come to that. That was brilliant.
That's
sorry.
near London. And because there's a serious lack of retro gaming television on today, Dave Perry and Revival team wondered what would be the interest in bringing back a dedicated retro gaming channel to the TV, or in this case, YouTube.
That's
because
right,
lots more kids nowadays are more interested.
Kids are more interested in YouTube than they are on television, So this project is called Games Animal TV, and we will be contributing to the project creatively. So we'll be doing editing and filming that, as well as contributing to features and segments and reviews. So the Retro Shed will be featured as a segment within this new show itself.
Yeah, and the project's in the early stages right now, but it will be initially one-off special show.
Yeah.
That will be mostly filmed at Revival 2018.
And a large part of the show will be actually input from the retro community. So if you have got any ideas or you want to be part of it, get yourself along to Revival Generation X 2018, which I think is May next year. I'm going to put all this information down below at the bottom of the screen. Subscribe to us here at the Retro Shed and check out Games Animal TV channel on YouTube as well, and keep in touch with what's happening with this exciting project. I can't wait. This is going to be really exciting actually. Anyway,
so
moving on.
To today's
show, is about a machine that for me is probably my favourite computer of all time.
He says this every time we look at a computer.
No, this time I really mean it. This machine...
But last time he really meant it.
No, I really mean it this time.
Right.
This time we are discussing a machine that is my favourite of all time, full stop. It's better than any other computer, as far as I'm concerned, ever. There's nothing better than this machine, and that is, of course...
the PS4!
The Commodore Amiga.
That's what I said. So, okay, I'm going to ignore that. That is the reason why I've been slapping my hand over his mouth nearly at the end of every episode, because he was close to spinning the secret, and I wanted to keep it a surprise.
Why did you want to keep it a surprise?
Because I did.
Okay. Okay.
It's not a surprise to them now.
No, it's not now, is it?
Yeah, so we all have that one console or computer that inspires us, and those fun childhood memories of us, and those, don't we?
It's like, everyone has their favourite machine.
Everything you have in your childhood is like, that's always probably going to be...
Yeah, so for you, it'll always be the PS4, won't it?
Yeah.
Well, for me, the Amiga is an incredibly special machine indeed, and it is for many people, actually. For all those people that I've argued with over the years, at school, well, no, just after school, actually, because I kind of, grew up when the Amiga came out, which is better, the Atari ST or the Amiga?
That's what we do today.
Let's just say...
PS4 or Xbox One.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this sort of stuff's gone on for generations, hasn't it? Yeah. Let's say, for the record, I love them both. We have an ST, we have 4 Amigas, and they are all absolutely brilliant. The Amiga itself is such an amazing computer, and it was a good decade ahead of the competition. There was nothing like it on the market at the time. The first time, here's a story time.
It's
Story time. The first time I ever saw an Amiga was in that strange shop in Birmingham again called Lasky's, right?
Oh, that one!
Yeah, Lasky's on Corporation Street in Birmingham, which is near London in England and the UK.
That's near London.
And I walked into Lasky's to have a look at the computers like I did, and there was a big group of people hanging around a computer, and I could not see what the computer was. There was just people everywhere. And anyway, this crowd died down, and I managed to look over and see what it was. And on the screen, there was a demo, a real-time demo of a cat, like a domestic cat, walking, and the camera was panning around this cat in 360 degrees. And I was just like, oh my god, it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. And, and I said, what computer's that? Because I was used to like the Commodore 64 and the MSX, and there was this beautifully animated cat, and the guy said, oh, that's the new Commodore Amiga. And I was just like, I want one of those. And that was pretty much it. This was like 1986. Oh, it was about £1,600 something, which was a lot of money back then.
Even for nowadays.
And eventually, when I got my first job, and I think one of my first wage packets, I went off and bought a second-hand Amiga that somebody was selling on the CB radio. Believe it or not, I was on the CB back in those days, on the radio.
Yeah.
And somebody came on Channel 19 and said, anyone want to buy an Amiga? And I'm like, what? Snatched up the mic and said, what are you selling, mate? Guy's name was Daffy from Kings Norton in Birmingham. If anybody knows who Daffy was, I can't remember his name. Thanks, mate, you sold me the Amiga.
Have we still got that particular Amiga?
Yeah, it's on the shelf over there. So I shot round to his house, and I think he'd been bought it as a present, and he didn't want it. So I managed to pick up this mint Amiga for like 200 quid when it was supposed to be more like 400 quid.
So actually, yeah, the ST and the Amiga are actually really close, technically.
Technically, yeah.
They're almost identical. They were literally separated at birth.
Yeah, that's right.
If it wasn't for Atari, then the Amiga probably wouldn't have existed.
No, that's true.
But where does this amazing story start off then?
It starts off a long time ago, actually. So the story Amiga,
in a galaxy far, far away. Is that copyright?
Silicon Valley, really. The story begins in 1977 at Atari with a very, very talented chip designer called Jay Miner, who most people actually credit for being the father of the Amiga. He helped design the Atari 2600, actually, along with Nolan Bushnell and Ted Dabney.
Yeah, so after the success of the Atari 2600, Jay's next job was to design Atari's first personal computer, which was released in, 1979?
1979.
And this was the Atari 400.
That's right, yeah. A more powerful version followed up. It was launched called the Atari 800, which had a better professional keyboard and a higher specification than the 400. And the 400 and the 800 featured some very powerful hardware at the time, actually, which was ahead of their rivals. Compared to an Apple II or a TRS-80, the Atari machines were well ahead of their time.
Yeah, true, actually. And Jay became unhappy with the direction Atari were taking in the early 60s and wanted to...
60s? They were all smoking drugs in the 60s.
Oh, no, it wasn't. It was the 80s.
The 80s?
I swear it's the 60s.
No.
80s.
80s.
And they wanted to continue developing computers with a brand new CPU that had recently come onto the market. The Motorola 6800.
The Motorola 6800.
I can never say that.
Motorola. The chip was years ahead of its time, actually, and it was very easy to program for, but the problem with it was an expensive CPU, and the Atari management did not want to use this CPU in basic games machines. Yeah. So Jay had a dream of creating the ultimate home... the ultimate gaming stroke home computing.
Doesn't everyone have that ultimate dream?
I have lots of ultimate dreams.
And Alan Sugar had the ultimate dream.
Yeah.
The Amstrad.
And he wanted to build this computer using the 6800 CPU. But Atari simply were not interested. So guess what he did? He quit. He quit Atari in 1982. But he never gave up his dream on creating the ultimate computer and eventually ended up taking a job as head of engineering at a new video game hardware company called High Toro. The problem was... High Toro was a company that already existed in Japan, and they made lawnmowers. So they couldn't use the name High Toro.
Okay, yeah, so Jay wanted his dream computer to some friendly and cool at the time.
He wanted the name to sound really cool,
so in the end he chose Amiga, which of course is Spanish for female friend.
Yeah.
Plus, Amiga came before Atari in the phone book, so...
That's a tactic.
We have never heard of that before.
We have heard that before. Yeah. Steve Jobs, I think, did something with the name Apple because that came before IBM, I think, in the phone book. But yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So work started on this new ultimate computer at a company called Amiga, not Hi-Toro. But the company had to resort to various tactics to ensure that the information was not leaked because people were interested in what they were doing. So they came up with some elaborate names for the custom chips that were being designed by the hardware guru, David Morse.
Was he related to me? In that he is related... Are you saying that the guy that made the Commodore Amiga, well, not made, but how, is related to us?
No, he's just got the same name as us.
Oh, anyway, so this is the reason why, if you look inside an Amiga, you will see the chips are named Agnes and Denise and Fat Agnes, etc.
That's right.
Fat Agnes.
Fat Agnes, yeah.
The idea was, if telephone conversations were being tapped, no one listening would have a clue what the engineers were talking about.
That's right. They'd be saying things like, "Oh yeah,
Fat
Agnes is coming along quite nicely, actually,
So
but
is Fat
Denise,
Agnes as well,
Denise is lagging behind. We need to put some more development time into Denise." So
What
people
about
would be
Fat
thinking,
Agnes?
"Fat Agnes, yeah." Video chip, I think. I can't remember. It was a sound or video chip. Anyway, the design of the Amiga began to take shape, and even Jay's dog Mitchie was even allowed to help out designing the computer.
How on earth would a dog help out on a computer?
You don't believe me, do you?
No? Are you saying he licked it to see if it tasted nice?
Kind of. Yeah, whenever a design decision had to be made about the Amiga, right, they would get Mitchie sat there, show Mitchie the drawings, and depending on how the dog reacted to the drawings, so for example, if the dog looked excited, that's what they'd go with. And if the dog kind of like just sniffed at it and looked away, they think, well, that's a bad idea, we'll drop that.
So you put it in
yeah, so Mitchie the dog actually helped shape what the Amiga became.
You're saying a dog made the Amiga look like it does?
Not quite, but he helped. Moving on.
What? I don't understand that. The Amiga prototype was first shown in January 1984 at the CES show and featured a demo of a bouncing ball that excited and amazed people.
Yeah, and they knocked that up overnight.
Yeah, that bouncing ball became an iconic Amiga image and the symbol for the Amiga itself.
It did, and they actually coded that demo overnight. They had nothing amazing to show because they were running really, really late.
Yeah.
So what can we do? So these guys coded this amazing bouncing ball.
That Dreamcast thing where it bounce, and it goes into like a swirl.
Similar.
Like the Dreamcast.
Similar to that, yeah. Now, even though there was a lot of interest in the Amiga, the company was rapidly running short of money, so the CEO, Dave Morse, gave presentations to a number of different companies, such as HP and people like that, in an effort to drive investment in the project. No one was interested in it. How can you not be interested in the Amiga? But
they didn't know what it was going to be like.
Well, yeah, you've got a point there. But Atari was slightly interested, and they lent Amiga $500,000.
Well, that's not a big loan.
No, that's not bad, though. No. With the provision that this would be paid back within 6 months, or Atari
6 months?
6 months, or Atari would end up owning the Amiga technology.
Not a really good agreement, but Jay Miner and his team had no choice.
No.
I mean, there was no money left at Amiga, and Jay was on his second mortgage at this point.
That's right, they completely run out of money.
He was close to losing his house.
He was actually, yeah. Now, fortunately for Amiga, there was one company that was interested in the product, as their very own line of successful 8-bit computers were coming to the end of their lives, and this was, of course,
PS4.
Commodore.
So, Commodore gave Amiga the $500,000 to pay back Atari.
Which was nice of them.
Plus $4 million for the rights to use the custom chips. Plus another $24 million to purchase the entire company outright.
Wow, $24 million for the company called Amiga. That's brilliant.
That's pretty good.
Amiga had been saved by Commodore, but now
saved.
lock, stock and barrel belonged to Commodore, which of course seriously annoyed those chaps over at Atari who thought they were going to get their hands on the hardware. And this ended up in a huge court battle that went on for many, many years. Jack had already seen... Jack? I'm thinking of... Sorry, cut.
Where'd you get Jack
I'll tell you now. See, Jack Tramiel...
Yeah.
Jack Trammell, left Commodore and went to Atari.
Right.
So Jack had seen the plans for the new Commodore the Amiga, and wanted it for himself, you see. Commodore stepped in, his old company stepped in, pulled the rug from under his feet, and grabbed all the rights to the Amiga. Atari had all.
That's snaky.
It is really snaky, isn't it? See, Atari at this point had already seen the design and the prototypes of the Amiga, so they quickly went to market with their own 16-bit computer called the Atari ST. So called because it stands for 16,000. This is the reason the Amiga and the ST are so very closely matched. They were virtually the same machine.
Because that Jack guy brought the ideas back to Atari and then they made it
You got it, yeah.
Even though they're from two separate companies.
That's why he was so angry when Commodore came along with more money and said, we will buy this. So Atari were like, well, hang on a minute.
I'm guessing that Jay Miner wasn't happy about that they were nearly the same.
He didn't really care because the money had come in at this point from Commodore. Commodore had given them the money to continue with the project. So, the first Amiga was launched in 1985 by Commodore, and it was called the Amiga 1000. It was a very powerful desktop machine.
Is that the one that you saw in the shop?
No, that's the Amiga 1500, which came a few years later.
Right.
It sold at a reasonable $1,295, and it could produce 4,096 colours, had 8-bit stereo channel sound, a dedicated multitasking operating system, and was vastly more powerful than anything else on the market at this time. But it was poorly marketed, and it wasn't really much of a success.
Ready? Flop.
It wasn't a flop, no, it just didn't do as well as they thought it was going to,
yeah. But all this changed in 1977 when faced with stiff competition from the Atari ST, and Commodore finally released the reduced cost Amiga 500.
Yeah, awesome machine, actually.
And the high-end Amiga 2000 for $699 and $2,395
respectively.
Yeah.
Because of this price drop, the Amiga 500 went on to become the most successful home 16-bit machine of all time, and eventually outsold its main rival, the ST. Now, the Amiga went on to become one of the most successful computing platforms of all time as well, with its immense graphics and sound capability. It was also, of course, the ultimate games machine. And I mean the ultimate games machine. A massive library of games were released for the Amiga, and some of these still today are people's favourite retro computer games of all time. People such as the Bitmap Brothers, LucasArts, DMA Design, who did Lemmings, Graft Gold, Sensible Software, Rainbow Arts, Factor 5, Delphine. I could go on and on. The list is huge. Although piracy on the Amiga was absolutely rife, with many European hacking groups releasing hacked copies of games onto their bulletin boards. Did you know that most people's Amiga game collections today, probably 60 to 70% of those games are all pirated copies?
Hacked.
Yeah, pirated copies,
Being a graphical powerhouse, it was also used in the production of visuals and CGI for television. And was used highly on television for game show graphics, CGI rendering for Babylon 5 and Sequest DSV. And of course, many Amigas were shipped with the wonderful paint package program Deluxe Paint by
Mr. Dan Silver. Yeah, now, before your time actually, so you've never seen Babylon 5, you've never seen Sequest, and you've probably never seen Catchphrase, because all the graphics...
Catchphrase?
You ever seen Catchphrase?
I think I've seen the new one.
I'll show you on YouTube. If you ever watch Catchphrase, you'll see that all the graphics were done by an Amiga, and I think they were all done using Deluxe Paint. Now, one of the biggest aspects of the Amiga scene was the amount of amazing graphical demos available to show off its sound and visual capability. Hacking groups such as Red Sector, The Silence, Phenomena, TriStar and Sanity developed some of the most amazing graphical showpieces for the Amiga.
Even though they were hackers.
Yeah, one of the greatest things about owning an Amiga was when your friends came round that owed STs, which is still brilliant, guys. The ST was brilliant, right? But you'd put in a disc and show them an Amiga demo, and they'd just be like, "Oh my god, that is incredible!" And it's like, yeah.
In 1990, Commodore released the enhanced chipset desktop machine called the Amiga 3000.
I used to have one. It was awesome.
Which again wasn't a mega success, but it wasn't a flop.
It wasn't a flop, no.
In 1992 came the Amiga 500 Plus.
Yes.
Is that the one you saw in the shop?
Yes.
Yes. Which was a slightly updated and cost-reduced Amiga 500 and was slightly incompatible with some early Amiga releases due to its Workbench 2.0 operating system.
Yeah, some games basically on the original Amiga 500 did not work on the Amiga 500 Plus. Slightly different ROM and chipset, I believe. But two other updates to the Amiga line came later in the shape of the smaller Amiga 600, which was pretty much released as a games computer, which was not a good idea by Commodore at all. And then
did that not sound good either?
It was okay. It's not really seen as a brilliant Amiga by the fans. And shortly after that, the more powerful AGA chipset was released, and the Amiga 1200 came out, which actually costs quite a bit of money today if you can find a really
do we have one?
Really good one. We have got one, really good one on eBay. And in the mid-90s, though, trouble loomed for the Amiga, and through bad management and poor business decisions by Commodore, the Amiga was seriously losing momentum as PC technology was beginning to catch up and overtake the platform. The new AGA chipset, which actually stands for Advanced graphical architecture, I believe.
Right.
The Amiga was pretty much obsolete. The 1200 was obsolete by the time it came to market. And Commodore had spent far too long resting on the success of the Amiga for too long, and instead of developing a worthy successor for the original machine and keeping it abreast of the market, the PC market just caught up, and there were just sound cards and graphics cards coming to the market, and the Amiga suddenly started to look really stale, which is such a huge shame. The final Amiga was released by Commodore was the A4000T, I believe, and it was released in 1984. There were 2 Amiga-based multimedia platforms released in the 90s, actually, to try and capture the market because new optical CD discs were coming out. One of them was called CD-TV, and it was literally like a CD player with multimedia capability. Didn't sell very well. It was very expensive. And there was a games console, an Amiga games console called Amiga CD32, which was based on the 1200 AGA chipset. Both did not do very well at all.
Were they flops?
They weren't really flops, they just didn't sell very well. I think the CD32 was expensive and the CD-TV was about £500. And the writing was on the wall for poor J Miner's dream machine.
Today there is a thriving Amiga scene with emulators, new hardware and massive support for new products and hardware.
There are, I mean, people love the Amiga so much. There's a product you can buy called the Amiga, the ARMIGA. It's not cheap. And it's a little ARM computer that emulates the Amiga, which is quite good, actually. Many of the people involved in the Amiga are still in the industry today. And we certainly would not see the thriving gaming market that we have today if it wasn't for the Amiga and the people involved in its creation and the games. What?
I had a very good idea.
What?
Mini SNES, mini N64, mini Commodore, mini Amiga.
There is a mini Amiga. It's called the Amiga. So, if I had to pick one desert island machine to play
for
the rest of my days, and it's true, for the rest of my days, if I was stranded on a desert island and I could only pick one machine to play for the rest of my life, it would be certainly, hands down, the Commodore Amiga with my crate of discs.
I'd take a McDonald's and the PS4.
What, just one McDonald's? That'd go off and that'd be it. They'd go rotten. But the Amiga for me is very special and it always will be.
And there you have our brief history on the Commodore Amiga, and next week we'll be looking at our top 10 Amiga games and demos, and you'll see why back in the late 80s and mid 90s there really wasn't anything that was as good as an Amiga in the home computer market.
No, absolutely nothing at all. There was this poorer cousin though from another family.
What's that?
The Atari ST.
Oh yeah.
Join us next time when we'll be looking at exactly what made the Amiga so incredibly good.
Bye!
See you later. Bye!